Hi, Dr. Hagmeyer here, and because I get the opportunity to work with a lot of patients that either have food sensitivity, celiac disease, gluten sensitivity, or some other intestinal related health problem, a commonly asked question that I'm often asked about those who are following a gluten-free diet is, can I eat quinoa? So first off, what is quinoa? Well, quinoa, while it looks like a grain and feels like a grain and smells like a grain, it's actually not. It actually belongs to what are classified as pseudo-cereals. And for a lot of people, they use these as a gluten-free substitute. And because many people are looking for ways to improve health, have eliminated gluten, they're now eating quinoa and many other non-traditional grains like millet and spelt and buckwheat and various other different kinds of grains. And perhaps that's you. Maybe you have celiac disease or you have a known gluten sensitivity. And you've eliminated wheat and barley and rye and oats, but you've only noticed a marginal improvement in your health. Maybe you've even fallen into the trap where a lot of people do, where you believe that because your stomach no longer hurts the way it used to, that these other grains are safe to eat. Well, there are three problems that I want to talk to you about today as it relates to quinoa, okay? So again, while quinoa is not a gluten-containing grain, there are storage proteins found in quinoa that are very similar in structure to gluten. So what happens is because they're similar enough to gluten, a person with a gluten sensitivity could have a problem with it known as cross-reactivity. And I should say that there's testing in this area that can be very helpful. So that's the first issue. The second issue here that I have with quinoa is that cross-contamination, okay? Just like many of the labels that you read, okay, processed in a facility with wheat, soy, and nuts, quinoa and many other cereals are often housed in the same vats and containers that wheat is stored in, and rye is stored in, and barley and oats are stored in. And so the processing of quinoa becomes contaminated with these other grains, okay? Now, what's really interesting is that there's been several studies that have looked at just this. In fact, there's one recent study that showed 41% of processed products that were randomly pulled from the grocery shelves contained enough gluten to actually cause damage to those with gluten sensitivity. So that's the second issue that I have. The third issue that I have with quinoa is that for many, many people with either celiac or gluten sensitivity, not only can they react to the storage protein or have cross-contamination, they can also be reactive to the lectins that are found in various grains, cereals, nuts, and seeds. Okay? Now remember, any grass-bearing seed can be a problem for this reason. Seeds, nuts, and beans are typically thought of being a good source of carbohydrates, a good source of proteins, a good source of B vitamins. The problem is that while you may look at the nutritional profile or the nutrient profile of these foods and be impressed with what's listed, there are many reasons these foods can't be properly digested. And many of the lectins and gluten storage proteins have now been shown to be contributors to not only a leaky gut, but then be a contributing gateway into various autoimmune diseases. What this all boils down to is that you could have problems with one and not the other, or you could be reactive to all three scenarios. For some individuals, these foods can be a perpetual source of inflammation and tissue damage. Lectins have specifically been linked to reactive arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, this is all dependent on how your individual immune system reacts and sees these foods. Another recent study that I reviewed examined 15 different varieties of quinoa to examine the safety for people that do have celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. And what they did is these quinoa proteins were tested to see what happens in those individuals who do have celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. What was their immune system response? And what they found was that in 2 of the 15 different varieties, they're called cultivars, there was an increased production of inflammatory cytokines. And now, a cytokine is a chemical messenger that is made by white blood cells, which are part of your immune system. And specifically what they found is they found an increase in the cytokines known as interleukin and interferon gamma. And they were elevated so much so that the elevated levels were as high as those compared to what you would see in someone who had just eaten gluten. So in other words, eating quinoa, and especially these variants, stimulated the immune system to such a degree that was similar to gluten. Okay? That's a huge problem for a lot of people out there who are eating quinoa and aren't aware of this. The other thing that this research article points out and sheds kind of a little bit more light on is that the traditional flawed thought that proteins in wheat, barley, and rye are the only food proteins to be problematic in patients with gluten sensitivity. Now, I know that right about now you're probably ready to throw your arms up in the air and say, is there anything I can eat? And because I get people saying that all the time, and unfortunately, there really is no short answer to that that I can give you there. But the best thing I can say is if you can find a doctor who understands this and can monitor your diet, and they can offer you some advice so that you don't wind up with all sorts of nutritional deficiencies and obviously further sickness and disease down the road. Now, I do realize that this can be a difficult challenge, okay? So for those people who find that to be a difficulty, I have put together 2 videos that are worth going back and watching on this specific topic. The first one is titled Lectins as a Cause of Leaky Gut Syndrome. And the second video that I did is why nuts, beans, and seeds can be so damaging to the body. Now, both of these issues, or I should say both of these videos, are really, should be watched by anybody who's suffering with any kind of GI issue, okay? So in closing this video, there are a couple points that I want you to end with, okay? Number one is when you take into consideration that up to 92% of people following a traditional gluten-free diet don't heal, they continue to be stricken with multiple forms of autoimmune problems. They continue to suffer with brain fog and fatigue and a variety of other different problems. It becomes absolutely clear that we need further research, okay? Number two, and I think the traditional definition of gluten sensitivity needs to be revised, okay? This definition really hasn't changed since the 1950s. Back in the 1950s, only wheat, rye, and barley were considered problematic grains. Well, since the 1950s, as you can probably imagine, research has just come a long, long way in areas of the immune system and obviously the immune system's response to different foods. And so this definition really needs to be updated, okay? So this wraps up today's video. I know it was a quick one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you subscribe to our channel. If you're struggling with any kind of chronic health problem and you need help and you want to work with us, the best way to get a hold of us is visiting our website, fill out a Contact Us form. Mention that you watched today's video. Tell us a little bit more about some of the health challenges that you're struggling with. So this way, when we get on the phone, we can have a little bit better idea of how we can best help you, okay? Well, until next time, take care of your body because it's the only one that you have and it has to last you a lifetime. Take care.